Okay, so now we're going to look at the uh, state of Europe around the time of its discovery of the New World, as well as the encounters that the Spanish first had with the Native Americans in the Western Hemisphere.
So what I first want you to do is go to the discussion page and imagine this scenario. So imagine that an alien life form came to Earth and abducted you like this and asked you to take them to the most impressive, sophisticated city that humanity has to offer. So they'll tell you, we've already seen the natural wonders of the earth, but they want to see what humanity offers culturally, so and in terms of technology. So what city would you take them to? They want to see a city. So where would you go? I want you to think about that for a second. Uh, because that's going to bear on our discussion going forward. So at this point, go to the discussions page and answer that question. All right, so the reason I do this exercise is because if an alien had showed up on Earth in the year 1492 and they said to some human, take me to the most sophisticated city you have, it would not be Europe, or any city within Europe. Europe was a cultural and technological backwater for the most part in the 15th century. It was quite poor compared to the premier destinations of the world. 90% of Europeans lived off the land through subsistence farming for the most part. Life expectancy in most of Europe was not much higher than 40 because of undernourishment and disease. The people were largely uneducated and poor, and they were dominated by a very large, or excuse me, the people in Europe were dominated by a very small proportion of wealthy elites, landowners, and a church hierarchy. The continent of Europe was politically fractured into hundreds of principalities, duchies, and city states, few of which got along very well. And the closest thing to a centralized government on the continent was the church in Rome, the Catholic Church. Kings were relatively weak. So Europe was a place that was dirty, it was not technologically sophisticated, and it was politically fractious. So today we might say a place like that might be certain parts of Africa or the Middle East or South Asia, places that have a lot of pollution, that have a high amount of poverty, particularly severe poverty where people are hungry. A lot of subsistence agriculture or poor workers. Again, you might think the Middle East, South Asia, parts of Africa. You wouldn't really think Europe. You'd think sophisticated places in the world. Europe would be a good example. But in the 15th, 16th centuries, that was not true. Europe was not the place you wanted to be. Where did you want to go? You wanted to go to the Middle East. The Ottoman Empire, one of the richest areas of the world. Baghdad would have been a good city to go to. Beijing, Chinese, the Chinese Empire, at that time the Ming Empire or Ming Dynasty, or even parts of Africa like the Kingdom of Mali, or even maybe Tenochtitlan. Where you wouldn't want to go would be Paris or London. Certainly not London, where they threw sewage in the middle of the street. Uh, Baghdad, Damascus, Alexandria, much nicer places to be. So you'd rather India, you'd rather go to China, you'd rather go to the Middle East, the Ottoman Empire, or Arabia. You would not go to Europe. This was the backwater of the world. The most sophisticated place in the world was undoubtedly China around the year 1500. So China was controlled by the Ming Dynasty at this time. It was undoubtedly the richest kingdom in the world. Uh, they produced lavish luxury goods, such as this vase here. This image documents the kinds of sophistication they had in their clothing, and Ming China was so wealthy that they were able to finance a series of 7 voyages led by an admiral named Zhang He. And Zhang He took his fleet of treasure ships, of trading vessels, as far as what's now Somalia, and made this series of voyages over a period of about 20 years. So it's this image calls him Cheng Ho. This is a difference in the transliteration. Zhang He, Cheng Ho, same person. So China was able to project its wealth very effectively. Europe had no way of doing this. To give an indication of how wealthy China was, this is a one of the treasure ships that Zhang He would have used, one of these trading vessels. This is one of the European merchant vessels that they were exploring with. So this should give you a sense of how much more sophisticated China's technology and wealth was compared to Europe's. This was considered technologically sophisticated in Europe compared to this Chinese vessel. The second most powerful region of the world would have been the Ottoman Empire. So the Ottomans were militarily some of the most sophisticated people in the world. They had a very elite corps of soldiers called the Janissaries, and they were instrumental in helping grow the empire. And the Ottoman Empire spread rapidly in the 14th and 15th centuries. By 1453, the Ottoman Empire had captured Constantinople and renamed it Istanbul. The Ottoman Empire dominated Mediterranean trade. They expanded as far into Europe as what's now Austria, and were only stopped from conquering more of Europe by a kind of last-ditch defensive effort by an alliance of European peoples here in the 15th century. So this was the predominant power in the Mediterranean world. The key to the Ottomans' power was their military sophistication, their excellence in state-of-the-art weapons, as well as their dominance of Mediterranean trade. So you can see here the Ottomans controlled these key trade routes by controlling the Mediterranean coastline. So how could Europe compete with Asia and the Middle East? They couldn't. What Europe wanted to desperately do was become more wealthy, but in the Middle Ages they really couldn't do that. Other than the period of the Crusades in the mid part of the medieval period from about 1000 to approximately the year 1250 CE, Europe had mostly looked inward since the fall of the Roman Empire around 500 CE. So except for that one period of about 200 years during the Crusades, mostly Europe was concerned with its own kind of machinations and problems. There were several factors that caused Europe, though, to want to spread outward and increase its global reach and influence, or deepen its footprint in world affairs by the 14th, 15th centuries. Ironically, one of those phenomena was the Black Death. So Europe and the world really underwent a massive plague in the 1340s through the 1350s, known as the bubonic plague or the Black Death. Initially, it was spread by rats to humans through fleas that were on the rats. Again, European cities were squalid, nasty places where sewage was dumped in the streets. So, very much unlike Baghdad or Damascus, where they had sewage systems. Uh, Europe, they didn't have that kind of technological sophistication. People literally lived with rats. The fleas jumped from the rats to people, and that spread the bubonic plague. The plague ended up killing millions of people in Europe. We don't know exactly how many, but we estimate approximately 1 in 3 Europeans died. It depended where you were, how bad the destruction was. And this went on for about 10 years. So, in about a 10 to 15 year period, approximately a third of all Europeans died, millions of people. There was some silver lining in the Black Death, however. One silver lining was that the Black Death reduced the power of landed nobility, the people that controlled most of the land. Their power was based on their control of the land and the people. With fewer people, they had less power. That relinquished some of their control over the political systems, and you started to see more wealth get into the hands of people who were trying to trade with the outside world more. The merchant class began to displace the landed nobility to some extent in terms of political power and influence. There was also a shortage of workers. So, with a third less population, the remaining peasants were able to argue for better conditions and higher wages and better treatment as a result. The production methods of Europe had to change, so they became more efficient, more focused on maximizing efficiency, and thus creating some trade surplus for those merchants to use. So the Black Death actually helped to increase Europe's interest in trading with the outside world, because it kind of had to. The old methods of gaining and maintaining wealth were no longer viable with reduced population. So some of the very small middle class in Europe wanted to develop trade routes with Asia. The good stuff was in Asia. You wanted to get access to, fine silks and fine vases like this. That was where the good stuff was, the good spices and so forth. So if you wanted to make money as a merchant, you needed to get to Asia. And overland trade routes did exist, but were very slow and dangerous. The other trade routes were through the Mediterranean and through the Middle East. That puts you directly in the path of Ottoman territory. So, overland routes, dangerous. Routes through the Mediterranean and Middle East, you have to go through Ottoman territory. The Ottomans would let you do that, but they demanded that you pay a heavy tax to traverse through their territory if you were a merchant. So you either had to pay a lot of taxes, or you had to take your life into your hands by engaging a long and dangerous overland journey. So European merchants began to look for
other ways to get to Asia.
Already by the 14th and 15th centuries, this new class of European aristocracy that was based more on money and less on landed nobility, this new merchant class began to develop more sophisticated banking and finance methods, which allowed the credit necessary to finance long voyages. Especially in Italian city-states, urban areas in what's now Italy, they began to, the merchant classes in these areas began to develop technology and geographic knowledge necessary for trading. The people, the elites in those urban areas, elite merchants, soon became the richest people in Europe. Still, these merchants had to deal with all the Ottoman middlemen. The Ottoman Empire still pretty much controlled the trade routes and extracted a lot of money through acting as mediaries and charging taxes to these people who were trying to travel outwards.